I've got no common sense, and neither has nobody else. I spread my brains out on the table and poke them about with a fork. So there we go.
I love it. It's great. Do you remember his name? Because I have a funny feeling I've
Yeah,
heard this guy.
it's Ivor Cutler.
Okay. No, I think I've heard that
Yeah,
before. All right, Chris, thank you so much for opening up the show that way.
yeah.
Really glad that you're on the show. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for making the time. Where are you located?
I'm in Peterborough, Ontario,
Okay.
so just between Toronto and Ottawa.
Okay, great. So we got Chris Magwood here from Builders for Climate Action. He's the founder, director, and the website is www.buildersforclimateaction.org. And you can reach his email at chris@buildersforclimateaction.org. And also, he's part of the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is rmi.org. And you can find Builders for Climate Action all over social media. You guys are all over Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all the players,
Yep,
everybody.
yep. Jen does a great job of making sure we
You
show up.
guys, like, I will say one thing before we get started. Like, you guys offer up a lot of information, man. Like a lot, which is great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we both come from an education background. So, Builders for Climate Action kind of comes out of a school called the Endeavor Center that started about 15 years ago. And so the idea was to be, open source about everything we did and everything we learned. So that right from the get go, the idea was share all the good stuff and the bad stuff, and let those lessons learned go further than just us and our projects.
It's well appreciated. Thank you very much that you guys are doing that, and I really enjoyed going through the website and looking at all information. So it's always a learning. You can learn so much from your website, which is great, and everything you guys are sharing. Let me do a quick shout out to Chris from Richardson Electrical Services. Chris and his dad doing amazing work. You can reach him on his IG account, which is Richardson_electrical_services. Their number to reach them is 437-227-3621, and his email is chris@richardsonelectrical.ca, and the website to reach them is also at www.richardsonelectrical.ca. And hear his story right here on this show, on show number 352. Thanks, Chris. Where do we want to begin here, Chris? Why did you get into this segment of the industry?
Well, I've been a residential design builder for about 25 years, and got my start by building my own house first for myself and my family, which was the first permitted straw bale house in Ontario, Canada. I didn't anticipate a career. I anticipated building a house and then moving on with my life, but it turns out that I loved building, and I loved that style of building, and all kinds of people just started coming out of the woodwork when the house was finished and kind of asking me to help them do it too. And so, it turned from an interest to a career. And so, I've been always really interested. We chose that way of building for that house because at the time, I was really concerned about energy efficiency and affordability and the toxicity of building materials, and a whole bunch of stuff. And at the time, doing that straw bale house seemed to answer all of those questions. And ever since, been I've been the person who's willing to try the new thing that nobody else wants to try,
Yeah.
and see how it goes. And so, it's made for a really interesting career. But I'm doing the carbon footprint stuff now because I guess over 10 years ago now, we had developed a system in the business of trying to be able to quantify everything for our clients. So wanting, if we're saying, well, we build energy efficient homes, we want to be able to measure it and say, this energy efficient, compared to, something else. If we were trying to build something non-toxic, we wanted to, actually quantify which materials did and didn't have what kinds of chemicals. So really into measuring things. And so at one point we thought, well, we should know the carbon footprint of all of these building materials. That's something we should also be measuring. And at the time, when I tried to do that, I just ran into a lot of kind of dead ends and information voids, but I got really interested in trying to figure that out. And so it just happens that my own interest and the kind of growth of that sort of information happened at the same time, and so I just got involved when lots of other people were getting involved, and was able to do some work and some projects to help figure this out. Specifically for the kind of low-rise residential industry, there was more interest from architects and engineers of big buildings, but nobody was really looking at homes very much. And so I was able to kind of put my knowledge of how to design and build homes together with this research on understanding the carbon footprint of materials.
I just realized, Chris, I mean, have we crossed paths before? Because I'm wondering did you ever attend the Blue Green Group, or did you ever speak with Greg LaBelle or Shervin?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we've totally, because in my early years of construction, I was fascinated by it, and I still don't know how I came across Chris or Shervin. But I think I was introduced to them some way, and I was fascinated by what they were sharing, which reminded me of what you were just sharing right now. And there aren't a lot of people doing it. And I guess my question is, when did you build that first house? How far back are we talking about?
That would have been in 1996.
Okay, so we're talking a few years here.
Yep.
Where did you get your information? Because even when I was going to their boots on the ground events, I was like, this is amazing that you guys are getting all these people together and we're having these conversations and we're talking about these details that nobody else is talking about on a regular construction site. We're building traditionally and we're just attacking it the same way that we always do. But I was fascinated by that. I was fascinated by people actually engaging in this stimulating conversation about building a different way.
Mm-hmm. So and I think that's what got me, so involved and so deeply involved, is that at the time, people definitely all over North America, but also all over the world, who are kind of figuring the straw bale thing out, were not just figuring it out, but talking to each other a lot. Very early internet kind of listservs were a big source of information. For a bunch of years, there was actually an international straw bale conference being held in different parts of the world, and you'd go and you'd meet all these people from all over the world doing this thing, and doing it in a way that really was, you talked about open source at the beginning. Like, I've never met a community that shares more than that straw bale community. Like, somebody might have messed up a building completely. Like, the whole thing might have, rotted, and they would just tell you what happened and why and how they fixed it. And so my whole introduction to the building world was people being really honest about that stuff. And I was, I think a bit naive when I started getting more into the mainstream construction. I thought you just talked like that with people all the
time. No, you don't, Chris.
No, apparently not.
No. But, there's some good magicians in this industry. They like to hide a bunch of stuff. But you're totally right. That passive side of the industry, they because they want to problem solve. They really want to learn and cause an effect of what happens as a result of doing certain details, because there's so many people around the world that are trying these details out, right? And I really wish, I'm sure you guys are trying to do this, more and more would do it right here in Canada. I would love to see more projects that are coming up this way.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about working with a material like straw bale is people get this sense that, it's really vulnerable, or it's really, moisture prone or things like that. It's actually incredibly resilient. 25 years later, there are hardly any examples of issues, but that wall system speaks to you very loudly when it has an issue, right? Like,
yes, yeah.
Your plaster is your air barrier and your final finish. And so if there's moisture, you see it on the plaster. Like, you see those failures in real time, or not even, you see them before their failures, which is nice, right? It's like, hey, there's a weird damp patch here. Like, what's going on? Oh, look, there's air going through the electrical outlet on the other side. It's, moisture loading this one place. I better air seal that. Like, so it just, everybody doing that kind of building realized all of these building science lessons really quickly and in a really critical way. Like, you couldn't ignore those things. Those dark patches aren't hidden behind some siding and behind a air barrier paper or something like that.
Really,
it's like,
really talk about a house breathing. You can literally see lungs expanding, like a home's lungs. And that's what I liked about it. You're 100% right. How quickly did you start analyzing your build? after you built it?
Immediately. Like,
Okay.
because in order to get our permit, we had to convince the building department that it wasn't going to rot. So I had to track down anybody who had done testing, either like in situ or lab testing, and basically all of the tests that I could show. The building official at that time said, as long as you're controlling air movement through this wall system, it's incredibly resilient. It can handle all kinds of highs and lows in humidity and temperature. So it was baked in right away that air tightness was critical, but also seeing the value of something that's airtight but vapor permeable. You know, I had to learn that like literally before I learned how to be a carpenter. So before I knew how to nail two pieces of wood together, to get my permit, I was already having to learn these building science lessons that in 1996 were not
No,
like,
not even a conversation.
yeah, nobody was talking about this except people doing these weird natural building things. And so it was a fascinating sort of like step into the world of building science almost before it was called building science.
It's
Um,
interesting, Chris, that you say that the building department was asking you to prove that your structure will not rot, which is a question that I think should be asked of today's building industry.
all the time. Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
never been asked. It's
Yeah.
never brought up. And I'm
Yeah.
like, why isn't it? Because I'm sorry to say, even though we're building to the minimum standards of the Ontario Building Code, sometimes it's not installed or built properly, and it actually starts to create rot. It starts to create deficiencies, and then they don't ask that question about it. They just automatically assume, well, you meet the criteria, you've actually achieved certain hurdles, so we assume that the house is perfectly fine. Which is that
Mhm.
question should be asked all the time.
Yeah. Asked all the time. And I mean, to be honest, I don't know why in Ontario you still don't have to do a blower door test. Like,
I think that should be mandatory on
yeah,
every single. You build a shed, I want to see a blower door
yeah,
test. Like
yeah.
I totally, I
Because
agree with you.
find those spots. Like, if
Yes.
there's going to be a problem, it's going to be where that air is leaking during the blower door test. So figure that out now before it's buried and
It,
fix it.
it's the
And
most cost effective and efficiency effective way to
yeah,
build a structure.
yeah.
We learned from that. I remember the very first time I did a blower door test, and I was fascinated. I thought I did well, but I was fascinated by all the holes that they found. And I was like, what's with you guys? Why you guys keep on? Well, we're just, the house is telling us where the holes are. That's all it is. We're just,
Yeah.
then the whole, education process of negative pressure and everything like that. And I was like, now I
Mhm.
get it. Now I totally
Yeah.
understand it. And I'll be back. I'm gone with my caulking gun now. See you later. I got a lot of work to do. So no, I totally agree with you. You think they'll ever throw that into the code?
It was proposed here in Ontario and then kind of shot down by the industry. But I think yes, it will end up in
Eventually.
there sooner or later. Yeah.
So, what are some of the major lessons that you learned building your first house, and some things that you would do differently today if you had an opportunity to rebuild it again?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I actually did have the house I'm in now is my second straw bale house, so I did have an opportunity to
Nice.
to
How
try
old
it
is
all
that
over
one
again.
now?
What was that?
How old is that one?
It is going into its 12th year now.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of lessons. Air tightness is a big one. Like you said, you learn quickly, and the amazing thing about doing a blower door test is you not only figure out where the problem is this time on this house, but like how you're going to not even have that problem next time. It's like, that running around with the caulking gun is great way to fix it at the time, but what we tried to do is like, okay, let's anticipate that and do the thing that means we're not going to run around with the caulking gun on that one. So by the time we built this house, this is a straw bale house with natural plasters on the walls, and it blew a 0.8
Oh, wow.
in 2012. Like, that was we were pretty
That's
proud of that
huge. Yeah,
result.
that's
And
huge.
that's a natural building system that I think a lot of people would assume either you can't get that airtight, or like, how are you going to do that? Well, it took 10 years, but we figured out how to do that to the point where we can sort of replicate that pretty easily now.
And then what are the numbers like? I mean, because I'm sure that you're analyzing everything and you're trying to factor in your consumption for operating the house. And I mean, like, do people start to understand that this is a viable option for building when they start looking at these numbers?
Yeah, I think so. I think, the thing that mostly stops it from being a viable option is just you know, it's still this kind of unique one-off material. And, in our practice, we sort of played around as a bit selling it short, but, we prefabricated the wall system a lot of times, but we only did it for our projects. I think if you could if you could buy this system, more people would use it. But the fact is, if you want a straw bale house right now, you're kind of into finding a specialized contractor. And you know there's one here in Peterborough. She's booked 2-3 years in advance now. So
Wow, good for
just
her.
the labor pool just isn't there for the kind of custom builds, and the product solution isn't there. In Europe, it is. There's 3 different companies in Europe that make really slick prefabricated straw bale systems, but it just hasn't made its way here yet.
No corporations have jumped on here in Canada, and I mean, I'm just no. That's kind of sad to hear.
Yeah.
They just don't see the. I don't even want to say it, but I guess they don't see the value in it. Like homeowners, and generally, they don't want this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the market is a funny thing in the home building world. People are always like, well, don't homeowners want this? Homeowners don't get a choice.
It's
I mean,
true.
developers build communities. They build them the way that they would like to build them for their own sort of efficiencies and costs and all of that kind of stuff. But what the homeowner is choosing is a countertop and a flooring option in the foyer. It's not really, there's not much homeowner choice driving the new homes market. So and I understand why a large developer wouldn't move to something like this. They're going to switch a whole bunch of things in their supply chain, switch a whole bunch of things in the way they do the buildings and the people they need on site to sell a house at the exact same price to the exact same person. It there isn't enough of an advantage to tempt somebody to make what would be like a huge change in procedure for a large home builder.
I mean, I would love to tackle a straw bale house one day just to experience it because I think it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to actually swing the hammer. You've done it twice now, so you totally understand what I'm talking about.
Oh, I've done it like 40 times.
Oh, there you go, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I would love to experience that, but it's just I also like seeing the young homeowners that they start talking to me about energy consumption on their track builds or they
Mhm.
took over a house that's and they remodeled it or did something to it. And then I just look at their numbers of the usage and utility and I was like, guys, what's wrong with you? And I'm doing little things in my own place and I'm seeing my utility and I'm showing it to them. And I'm like, guys, I'm a fraction of what you guys are doing because I'm just trying to do what I can. I'm taking a typical suburban house and trying to do what I possibly can to add more efficiency to it so then I don't need to consume. And I walk around my neighborhood and all I hear is air conditioning units going on right now.
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
frustrates me. It totally frustrates me to hear that. And I have yet to turn mine on this year. And it's probably not going to turn on for a little while. So then I'm not using that power. And it's the same thing with the straw bale. Like you design
Yeah.
a house a certain way that Mother Nature works with you and not against you. And that's the
Yeah.
biggest lesson that you can learn.
Even really basic things like you know uh, good passive solar shading on the windows. Like
Yes.
why isn't the air conditioning on in this house? It's not the magic insulation. It's there's an overhang over the south windows that means summer sun isn't coming in those windows, so the building's not overheating, and I just don't need it. And yet in the winter, the sun's low enough that it's getting full on into those windows, and I'm picking up all the
All that heat.
the solar gain from that. That cost nothing. It wasn't high tech. It wasn't. If I were to rewrite the Ontario building code, that would be my first line. It's like, show me how this building interacts with the sun, because that's the thing. That's where all the energy comes from. That's what you want in the winter and don't want in the summer. And the number of buildings you see going up where they've got a massive south or west bank of windows, just
You already know how
soaking that
heavy
all
those
in all
bills are.
summer. And
I
yeah,
know. I know.
yeah.
Have you guys, I don't know if you guys have, but have you guys tried to work with the government? Are they on board with some of this stuff or it's just not the media soundbite that they want to use right now?
Yeah, I haven't really taken part in the sort of codes writing building world here in Canada. So no, not really. Until fairly recently, until all of this, the sort of carbon footprint stuff that I'm doing now, we were very much, over in our own little world of high performance natural building. It's a pretty small place, and it didn't feel like there was much conversation happening with codes folks or the mainstream construction world. And I think that's really started to change in the last 5 years because of the focus on climate, because people are starting to realize, oh, like toxic building materials make people sick, and that's a real thing. And people are trying to be more energy efficient, and it feels like that sort of mainstream world has caught up to where the high performance natural building world started. Those were all the goals that we had 25 years ago, and have kind of really refined and in some ways perfected now. And it's kind of exciting that we're starting to have those conversations with the mainstream, but it's not. It's fairly recent that that's started to happen.
I do love that I am seeing a lot more younger builders, younger tradespeople having this conversation, and engaging with this conversation, and they're seeing the value attached to it. And so that's really important. I would love for you to share with the listeners about certain materials that you like, that's on your beautiful grocery list of products that you like using, or even some products that you have used that maybe not necessarily didn't work out perfectly, but still learned something from it. But I do like hearing about certain products, and I want to learn more about different products that you've used, you come across, if you can share some of those.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's, I think in the work I've done, there's a sort of mix between products, like a thing you can go and buy, and materials that you kind of go get the raw stuff and make your own thing out of.
Yes.
Like, is straw bale a product? Not really. You got to go find a farmer and buy the straw. So it's a material. So a lot of things are like that. I've done a lot of work with earthen-based materials. I love earthen floors. I think everybody who's ever walked on one wants one immediately. They're beautiful, incredible. Like, it's just hard to describe how good they feel under your feet. But again, that's, you go get some dirt and you come up with a mix for that dirt, and you lay it, but it's not really a product. So there's that whole side of things, the plasters and the clay floors and the straw bale and hempcrete and all of these things that are sort of more make it yourself stuff. But I feel, again, like those worlds are somewhat starting to come together. There are places that make a hemp bat insulation now. There's a Canadian company called Nature Fibers, and then there's Hempitecture in the US. What an amazing thing. It's like, it's everything that I would want from my straw bale in terms of it's healthy, it's natural, but it's also a bat insulation. And for an installer of a bat, it's actually a really good bat insulation. It's really like firm and square and cuts really cleanly and installs really neatly. And so there's starting to be some really interesting crossovers like that. Graphenstone paint is another one. Like, we've mixed our own lime paints for ages, and now it's like, oh, Graphenstone makes this thing. You can just buy it. It comes in a can, and somebody rolls it on, and so more and more there's these great crossovers where the kind of like the things that we've been trying to achieve in the natural building world are starting to show up as actual products that you can go and buy and install.
Are you guys having, because I know that certain trades, there are far and few that would actually handle this kind of work, especially like the plastering and things like that, certain details. Are you guys having a difficult finding the trades to do the work themselves?
Yeah, I mean, we just do the stuff that is different in-house.
Okay.
Like, we're not typically trying to find a trade to do it. If we're going to deal with a natural paint or a plaster, that's us. Because
Are you educating other people so they can get, because eventually you guys won't always, I've always thought about my exit. I'm trying to figure out, I want to just pass on the knowledge so then somebody else could take it over. But I could see certain people only embracing these techniques, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Jen and I, ran the Endeavor School for 10 years, and that was that attempt. It's like, how do we replace ourselves? Well, let's you know, teach a group of students every year. So that's for 10 years. That's the projects we did with a group of students. They kind of joined us at the start and they were there with us to the finish. And so they got to see those, all of those materials, all of those techniques. And, it's interesting. Some of those students went on to specialize in one thing. Like there are a couple people who came through Endeavor who do now specialize just in natural paints and plasters.
Got it.
They saw all the different parts of the build and they're like, this is what I like. Or, there's a couple people who do, solar and renewable energy installations because that's the piece they liked. And actually more people coming out of Endeavor did that, like picked a specialty trade. We thought we were going to kind of turn out more general contractor types, who would do the whole house. And actually the people doing that were few and far between, but people really did sort of pick up and sort of run with lots of little sub trades. But our student base for that was pretty international. So we'd get 15 or 20 people come for a season, but then they spread out all over the world. And it's not like here in Ontario, there was suddenly a glut of people, there. So it's still fairly few and far between in terms
It's
of finding
growing.
those.
It's good to hear that it's growing somewhat, that you're getting more and more of a generation that actually is conscious about building better, much better
Yeah.
than what typically everybody's talking about, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the numbers, like the cost. I know you mentioned earlier that it's almost the same, it's very similar. When you're building at that point where it's brand new construction, are we very close on the cost numbers regarding just building it? Yeah, we're very close, right? That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Using digital platforms in our industry is becoming more common, especially among the young folks, because it improves efficiency, prevents mistakes, and overall makes our lives as contractors easier. This is why we partnered with Connectteam, a platform built to manage, train, and communicate with your team. Connectteam's desktop version gives managers a live overview of the business to track work hours, create schedules, make sure the business meets compliance, and so much more. Employees just download the app to their mobile to clock in and out, share safety reports, and get updates all in one place, ensuring they've got what they need to perform at their best. Connectteam has a free plan and a 14-day free trial. Try them today by checking out the link in the show notes.
Yeah, especially when we're even if you're doing like on-site prefabrication, we realize that one great way to do straw bale walls is just on-site tip-up panels. We spent 15 years bringing all these bales and stacking them in place and then trying to plaster in place and working against gravity. And we realized, if you make the whole thing lying down, just like a framer would, but you're doing a bit more, you do the plaster and the insulation and everything, and then stand the thing up, the time goes way, way down. So, I think on the wall system, the time and the cost is as good as or better than anything out there. The rest of the stuff, it really depends. Some of the things do cost more. I mean, as soon as you stick renewable energy on a building, the price is going up. So if that's part of it, that's always going to show up in the final cost. And it's more the systems based stuff. Are you doing rainwater catchment and sort of filtration and use? It's a great thing to do, but it's always going to be more expensive than just hooking up to the city. Sometimes the paints and finishes, if you're purchasing them rather than making them yourself, they can be a bit more. But by and large, what we found was that the margin of difference in price between the way we were building and anybody else would build, you can absorb that in a fancy countertop. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of talking in the sort of like $10,000 range on a house. So it's not a huge bend one way or the other. And certainly somebody who's being budget conscious could do a really good kind of high performance natural build and end up in the same ballpark as a more conventional one.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm trying to think of what kind of a square footage size are we talking about for you to build? What are the projects that you're tackling these days?
We typically are anywhere sort of between 1,200 and 4,000 square feet. That's kind of been the range that we've worked in.
So if you get in the higher range, I mean, if you're getting closer to 3,000 or 4,000 square feet, you're still at about $1 million construction budget, and then you'd probably be about the same for a passive. You're going to do a construction budget as well too. And I've always said that it's not necessarily one single line item; it's sort of about the overall budget. And so where you spend a lot more money on a wall assembly or a certain assembly, you're saving on different things. But then there's also the factor of later on regarding your consumption.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah, and it's interesting, the bigger buildings sometimes that those costs show up differently. So a couple of years ago, we did a project for Trent University, so not a residential, but a teaching building,
yeah,
and it was just under 5,000 square feet. And there was definitely a cost for making that building hit sort of passive house levels of efficiency and airtightness. But suddenly at that size building, you really see, oh, but now we only need I don't remember the tonnage, but a much smaller heat pump to run this whole thing.
got it.
And that was a $15,000 difference. And so, like we turned out to be even because we needed a much smaller heating and cooling system to run that building. And then we needed less PV to make it net zero. And so, yeah, I think that if you're thinking holistically about costs, then often being more efficient is going to, if not pay back immediately, fairly shortly afterwards. Because like the house that I'm in now, we got in 2012 we were able to get onto the Ontario government's system for getting actual decent money back for putting PV energy on the grid. We make $2,000 more a year from the PV sales than our utilities cost us. So, this is a house that's actually paying us to live in it instead of us paying for utilities. And so, that's hard to factor into that first upfront cost, because that's mostly what people want to see, right? Like, what's the sticker price on the house? But if you think about a sticker price on a house that has no utility costs and contributes some money to you every year, that's a really different scenario. But we don't really even have a way of talking about that. Like, nobody talks about overhead costs or operating costs as part of a house purchase decision.
Well, the government does it for appliances, which is the first tag that I rip off when I'm installing them, and I don't really pay attention to them. But I mean, they should. That's actually a good point that you're bringing up, Chris, that they should factor that into the house that's being sold. By the way, here's your
so
costs.
Should banks. If I'm lending somebody money,
yeah,
if I know that they don't have to cover $300 a month every month in utilities, and in fact they're going to be getting some income, like that should make a difference. That should be a safer,
valuable. That's extremely valuable. I know that you've been in your fair share. I've only been in a couple of passives, but there is a different feeling walking around that type of home versus walking around what I'm so used to seeing. Can you describe that? How that feeling is of that? For lack of a better word, I'm trying to think of it. It feels more of a home. Like, it feels more of a sweater. Like, it feels comfortable. It just feels better to me.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One is that the temperature inside is very constant. It doesn't matter if I'm standing next to the window or I'm upstairs or I'm downstairs. There's no more than a degree or so difference between your foot temperature and your head temperature, or like this end of the house or that end of the house. So it feels really comfortable that way. I think one of the things that people don't talk about, and it takes a while to notice it, but sound.
Yes.
An airtight house with a decent amount of insulation is very quiet. If you have windows that are sealed tightly and there's no sound coming in through air leakage, it's your separation from inside to out is really kind of remarkable. I would say that's one of the things about kind of the natural materials, is it adds to that sound, because there's nothing in this house that's perfectly flat. This wall looks pretty flat. I don't know if you can sort of see, but because it's plastered, there's just enough texture that there's no sound bouncing around. I've got a tongue and groove wood ceiling that isn't flat either. And so all the echoiness of a typical house, I mean, sort of like your sound studio. Why does it have that wood on the wall?
It just looks cool, but it helps with the sound.
It helps with the sound.
So it does a few duties. Yeah.
The worst possible thing for sound is absolutely flat drywall with 90-degree corners. I mean, that's Echo City, and that's kind of what we're used to. And
contributing to a dwelling not feeling like a home.
Yeah,
but yet that's the norm. That's the
Yeah.
majority of people are moving in, buying, purchasing. That's what they're getting, which is really
Yeah.
kind of weird that they don't realize that there's an opportunity here for a much better home.
Mhm. The other thing that people really notice at our open houses is people will come in and they'll go, this doesn't smell like a new house. It's like, and we're proud of that because, that new house smell it's toxic crap.
It's
Like it's stuff that
chemicals, yes.
you actually don't want to have around you, like we've come to identify like the new car smell, the new house smell as like fresh and new and like it's great because you just got this thing, but it's like no, those are actually the toxic chemicals like leaving these
And you're
materials
breathing
and
them in and absorbing them. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
No.
and a new house that doesn't have a new house smell, that should be what you want. That new house smell should be the like sign of death. Like don't you don't want this.
So the current house that you're in is 12 years old now?
Yep. Yep.
And I'm just curious, did you do another blower test? I'm just a blower door test that you.
Yeah, we
did
did
it hold the
at year
numbers?
10.
Yeah.
We had a former student of ours was starting to be an energy auditor and needed to do whatever 3 blower door tests to get his certification, and so he came and it blew exactly the same. I think
I love it. I love it.
the first time was like 0.88 and the second time he got 0.81, so it was like basically the same 10 years later. So we were pretty happy about that.
Which tells you something about the construction of the building, right?
Yeah. Well, it tells you that we're not relying on a lot of sheet barriers as our air barrier. Like it's plaster.
Yes.
It's if there's a hole in this, I'm seeing it. It's not hidden behind something. So you can really sort of, it's very visible if there is an issue, but if there's nothing visible, then there is no issue, and it's just as airtight as when you built it.
Chris, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your beam carbon estimator that you guys offer, right? So how did you guys come about that?
Well, like I said, I got kind of, went down the rabbit hole of what is the carbon footprint of the materials for this building. We just wanted to really learn that about our own projects. And I actually decided, it was in 2016, that I needed to go back to school for a little while and concentrate on this. So I here in Peterborough, I went back to Trent University and did a master's where I kind of really did a deep dive. I collected all the product information that was out there on carbon footprint for materials, and I kind of took a couple building designs and I started, saying, well, what if we use these materials to make this building, give it a carbon footprint? Well, what if I use this collection of materials on the same building, and kind of starting to compare what a high carbon footprint to low carbon footprint building looked like. And when I started presenting the results of that thesis out in public, people were asking, well, how did you do that? What tool did you use? And I was like, well, I didn't. I just made this spreadsheet and, built in all these calculations so I could get these answers. And the response was always, well, can I use that? And my first response was no, because the spreadsheet's a mess and you wouldn't understand what you were looking at. But it made it obvious that people wanted to do this, and because we kind of had now all the information that was necessary, we decided to make it into a tool. We were kind of kickstarted by a local municipality here. The township of Durrell-Dummer wanted to offer a low carbon footprint incentive. And so their chief building official was the first one to really say, hey, if you can put this tool out, we'll use the tool to offer people a rebate on their permit fees for making a low carbon building. And so that kind of got the ball rolling. And we decided to put it out as a free spreadsheet software. And I think what works about it is that, as the main builder of the tool, I'm also a builder. I think, so the user experience, as far as the software goes, was designed around a person who spent his whole life building things.
Yep. Who
isn't very software savvy. It's like, okay, I need to build this so that I understand it and I can use it quickly. And so I think that it works for a lot of people, and it, it's really straightforward for people who understand buildings, because it just
once you
got
get it,
that
it
kind of,
speaks right to you. Like it speaks directly
yeah,
to you, and you understand it right away. And I
yeah,
totally forgot, Chris, and I apologize at the very beginning. I mean, you've written 7 books here.
yeah.
So, I mean, you can find all the books on Amazon, or you can find them on your website.
Both. Yep,
Okay.
they're out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, the tool is, I think one of the things that makes it unique is that I wanted I wanted to be able to use it in kind of three different ways. I wanted to straight up just be able to compare materials against each other in the same category. So the way Beam works, if you're say interested in bat insulation, you go to the bat insulation page, which is in the exterior walls tab, which where you'd expect to find it. And if you've said I need X number of square feet of insulation at R something, you will see the carbon footprint results of every bat insulation that there's information for
Yes.
at the same time, and the answer. So you're not having to build a model and then get to the end of the model and then go back and say, well, what if I change the fiberglass for mineral wool and then change it and then go back to the, like, it's all right there. So you can do those straight up material comparisons. You can also build a model just of a single assembly. So you can stay in the exterior walls tab and build, you know, people are interested, like, what's the difference between 16 and 24-inch on center framing for carbon footprint? What's the difference between brick cladding and fiber cement cladding? Like, so all of those answers are kind of there. You can build them into then a whole assembly, or you can build a whole house model and see, what a whole building looks like. But if from the get-go, we wanted it to be able to be used in all those ways.
I love it. I'd love for you to share. I don't know if you will though, but products not to use. And I don't want to get in trouble or anything like that. But I mean, if we get in trouble, we get in trouble. I'll take the heat. But if I've had other passive people on the show and talking about specific details, and they were a little reluctant to share certain products until the mics were off. And then they told me a bunch of products. And I was like, I thought so. I totally understood that. It made sense, right? But I mean, if there's some products that that you want to share that like you shouldn't be using in building construction, because I know that there's a lot of products in building construction that are the mainstream, but we shouldn't be using these products.
Yeah, I guess I'll preface that and maybe take a little heat off by saying, in our practice, we never sort of have like an absolute sort of like red list of things.
Yes.
What we have is a bunch of criteria that our client helps us, tells us what they're interested in. Like, if their number one driving thing is a non-toxic building, and maybe they're equally interested in like low toxic and high performance, you're going to get a very different building than somebody who's like, actually, I don't care about the toxicity. I'm happy with, code compliant level of energy efficiency, but I want like to create zero waste. And like, there's so many different there. When people say like, oh, I want a greener building, that could be all of those things. It is toxicity, it is waste, it is resource use, it is energy efficiency, it's indoor air quality, it's all of those things. So depending on how you order those criteria, that the list of appropriate materials really changes.
Yes.
So but I think, for me, foam-based insulations are problematic. From a carbon footprint point of view, the worst of them are really bad. The best of them are only as good as the worst of everything else. So, they're not great. I think the piece of that equation that makes me not want to use them is they rely on pretty hefty amounts of flame retardants in them to stop them from being fire accelerants, which, I mean, the chemicals in them are fire accelerants.
Yeah.
Those flame retardants are some of the most persistent and bioaccumulative chemicals on the planet. You can find them in all of our bodies everywhere, even if you've never handled the material. I don't want that in my building. I don't want that in my environment. I don't want that waste, in my landfill. So, to me, I try to avoid those. If somebody can come up with a foam that doesn't have, a really low carbon footprint and doesn't have the toxic loading, would I consider it? Yeah, maybe, but, not so much today. And anything with vinyl in it, PVC, same kind of thing. Like the toxic loading to you as the end user through the whole production of that material, the waste, like all of those things. Um, Paints, like I think we've been fooled in the sort of no VOC paint language
Such a
that
mislead. I know.
yeah, that these paints are healthy, and they're
Yeah.
absolutely not healthy, or they certainly haven't been proven to not be unhealthy. They've just been proven to not have the VOCs that cause smog, and that's all the no VOC label means. It's not a health label; it's a smog production label, and so you can have all kinds of dangerous to human VOCs in a paint that's labeled as no VOC, because if it's not causing smog, it's a no VOC paint. So I think those would kind of be some of my top materials that certainly I want to avoid. And it's, you see a lot of like win-win, sometimes win-win-win solutions in building, and you also see some like lose-lose-lose. And for me, if it's a combination of, it's got a petrochemical base, so that my use of this material supports the whole petrochemical economy. Like, I don't want that.
Yeah.
And it tends to have a higher carbon footprint, and it tends to have a higher toxic loading. So it's like, those are the things that, I don't want. And, I've always been able to find, completely reasonable replacements that have kind of like the opposite, the win-win-win. They're low carbon footprint and or carbon storing. They're not at all really involved in the petrochemical economy, and they're non-toxic. So, the more I can lean that way, those are my priorities. But, client by client, we kind of take those things differently all the time. And
So there's a lot of upfront research with you and your clients even before, a shovel's put into the ground. And it's not so much about that, that classic cola commercial where they pull out a faucet and built me a house around this, right? It's like, we're beyond that. We're way beyond that. So you guys are having so many interesting conversations about the type of home that you want to create here for this family.
And our first conversation is always, people tend to, if they want a custom build, it's because there's like a particular thing that's interested them. Like, we'll get the client is, I want a straw bale house, or I want a hempcrete house, or I want a solar house, or I want, they're kind of, there's a material or a technology that's grabbed their attention. And our way of working with clients is to say, okay, let's not talk about that. Like, we may end up building you a straw bale house or a solar house, but let's back up and find out why you're interested in that thing. Yes. Like, what are those underlying criteria? Is it that you care about toxicity? Is it that you care about your materials coming locally? Is it that you want a really efficient home? Like, let's dig and find those whys. Once we know those, they almost always, if you can get a good set of criteria from a client, the materials you pick, they pick themselves. Like, yes. There's probably only one or two choices that are like, at the high end of being non-toxic, but also affordable and available locally. If those are your three things, not very many things are going to fit in that Venn diagram. So you narrow down all that product research by just identifying the sort of underlying needs and wants. And then it's like, well, of course we're going to use this. It might be the only thing that satisfies all of these criteria, or, we might be choosing between two things because they both kind of fall in that range.
I look at it more like there's a better selection of products to use when you're building this way, instead of being bombarded with a bunch of marketing on a bunch of products that clever marketing is clever marketing, but it still doesn't make a product great. That's a whole other story. But I'd love for you to share your experience with the building departments that you've dealt with, and the inspectors, and the inspections. Because I know that, and I'm not downplaying the building department or the inspectors, but they're not the most savvy when it comes to this education. I've only had one out of all the inspectors I've ever worked with that stayed there and asked me questions about certain things I was doing and about the building, and I was building it differently. And he was genuinely curious about it. He wanted to learn about it because he wasn't seeing it all that often. But you guys are building homes that go against everything that department is generally building, and then
Yeah,
same with the inspectors and same with the inspections. So
yeah,
enlighten us a little bit on that kind of process that you've dealt with in the last 25 years. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I will say it feels like it has definitely changed for the better in that time. The whole kind of alternative compliance mechanism that I guess was around 2006 that came into the Ontario Building Code. That there was like a formal alternative compliance pathway, um, and so a lot of what we have had to do is just get really good at knowing how to use that, right? And I completely feel for and understand where building inspectors are coming from when they're reluctant for these things. You know, they're kind of taking on the liability for the entire municipality for
Yeah.
decades to come in these decisions they're making. They've got a stack of plans this high. You know, I've never seen a building department that's not understaffed, and
Yeah. Yeah.
people are frantically trying to like get permits out the door. So they want fast and they want easy, and like I have to acknowledge that if I'm doing the weird thing, I'm causing this person a headache. So how do I cause them the least amount of headache?
Yeah.
And so we just try to really prepare. We try to anticipate their questions. We try to like not just bombard them with documentation, but provide documentation, but like give them all the key takeaways from that documentation. You know, if they're concerned about fire, I'm going to give you the excerpts of these 5 fire tests that have been done around the world. You can read them in 10 seconds. And then I'll give you the 50-page reports, you know, in PDF if you want the backup. But, you know, it's like, how do I make this person's job as easy as possible, you know, to say yes? It's like, well, understand why they might say no. Understand, like, I have to understand the code. I have to know not just, oh, you're going to care that about whether this material burns or might be moisture prone. It's like, no, I need to say to you, like, as far as like 9.36 point, you know, whatever the code number is, that specific reference where it's saying this has to have a, you know, like a fire rating of 30 minutes, like, you know, let them know that I know the piece of code that they're going to find problematic. I've pulled it out. I've addressed it. You know, I've given them those numbers, and, you know, just try to make it as easy as possible. We got really good at that in our practice, but I think, you know, kind of goes back to our earlier point of why aren't more people doing this? That's the reason. You know,
Yeah.
the actual on-site construction, it doesn't cost that much more. It's not that, it might cost less. It's not harder. It's not, but this stuff, the like, convince the building inspector, convince the insurance company, convince, you know, the bank, all of those things. Again, it's doable, but that comes with a bunch of time and effort cost. And I'm willing to do it because I want to, and because, you know, I want to be able to build the kinds of buildings like this for the clients that want them. But it's not the kind of thing that everybody's going to undertake. You know, if you have to
Yeah.
add 20 hours of admin crap, you know, to get this through for somebody, not everybody wants to take that on.
Yeah. They want to spend more time on the countertops and, you know, those
Yeah,
products, things like that. But
yeah, and that is the fun part of doing a house too. You know, like not everybody cares what's in the walls or behind the ceiling, or, you know.
we care. We care.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I sure do. Yeah,
We totally care. Lots of people listen to the show. They care.
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but can we not build a whole subdivision this way? Using digital platforms in our industry is becoming more common, especially among the young folks, because it improves efficiency, prevents mistakes, and overall makes our lives as contractors easier. This is why we partnered with Connectteam, a platform built to manage, train, and communicate with your team. Connectteam's desktop version gives managers a live overview of the business to track work hours, create schedules, make sure the business meets compliance, and so much more. Employees just download the app to their mobile to clock in and out, share safety reports, and get updates all in one place, ensuring they've got what they need to perform at their best. Connectteam has a free plan and a 14-day free trial. Try them today by checking out the link in the show notes.
Totally. Yeah,
Like, why haven't we? We should. This is Canada. Let's do it.
yeah. It's we have a very strange innovation ecosystem in Canada. I'm realizing, you know, there are. I'm doing more work in the States now, and while there's, you know, we think of, from here in Canada, we think of Americans as being more conservative. there's also way more innovation and excitement around
Yeah.
innovation and money for innovation. Um, why are there three really great prefab straw bale companies in Europe? Because the European Union was funding that kind of work 20 years ago, and it's finally come to fruition now in real companies that are cranking out products. Um, I attended a really interesting webinar from the Straw Building Association of China, and they got a mandate from the government 5 years ago: use more straw in construction. So they rewrote the codes, they set up R&D things, and 5 years later there's factories producing millions of square feet of these straw wall products. Things just doesn't seem to happen like that in Canada. I think the markets are small. Like, you know the only place you might feasibly be able to do a prefab company is somewhere in the GTA, but you can't service Winnipeg from there. and
No.
and and even here, our housing market is a fraction of what it is in some other places. And then, yeah, there's not a whole lot of government support. I know when we were looking to sort of try to turn the prefab straw bale into more of a product, like, you could get a $25,000 grant to do a test, or but like there was no like great pathway to say, hey, the potential in this country for doing this is really high, like, let's put something behind it. It was all kind of like very small beans, and nothing that would sort of foster a big innovation or a big change.
Which is interesting, because you figure that a government that's kind of speaking the way they are speaking these days, that they would be backing something like this, that it should be happening. We should be seeing communities being built this way, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not, I guess. But that's a whole other argument.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting kind of place where there's so much, especially around climate, that's like liberal versus conservative. But the thing with especially sort of bio-based building materials is it speaks to rural communities, right? Like,
Yes,
maybe they don't want to be making prefab straw bale wall panels in Manitoba for the climate, but it supports farmers. It buys a byproduct from farmers at good value.
very good
It
point.
sets up a factory in a small town, and it serves people, in its region. Like, that's a win-win from lots of different angles, not just a sort of climate angle. And I would hope that we could have that conversation in this country where it's not like, this against this. It's like, this is one of those things where,
It works
like,
for
we
both
all win
sides.
if we
Yeah,
do this well.
I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. I'd love for you to share some insight onto some trades that are probably just getting into the industry and maybe considering going down this path and focusing more attention on that. Because I do love having guests on the show talking about, I don't want to say niche, because I don't think this is a niche market. I think that it's growing really good, really well. What would you tell new tradespeople about getting into building passively and what to prepare for?
Um, it seems right now that by and large you're going to have to do your own education. I'm not seeing a lot of trades programs that are particularly, forward looking and sort of trying to train people for what's coming instead of what just was. And there's lots of reasons for that. It takes a long time to write curriculum. The people who are in that system got in that system once they'd been in the industry for a while, and so what they know is kind of like yesterday's buildings.
Yeah.
So I think yeah, be willing to take some time, invest some of your own time to figure out the kinds of things that you're interested in. Find the people who you can learn from, that you can ask questions of, maybe even apprentice with. Um, and I think, what really interested and excited me through my whole career is like taking something that at the time was not ready for mainstream yet, and figuring out how to do that. Like, whether that was straw bale construction or earth floors or natural paints, it's like the I could see the potential in it, but I could see that I was going to have to figure out how to make it, time and cost effective.
Bumps
And
and
that's really
bruises.
interesting and really rewarding, but you're going to lose time and or money on your first few jobs, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not going to get it right the first time. Not that it's going to fail, but that it's going to take you longer. You're not going to see the efficiencies until you've done it and then gone, oh, that wasn't very efficient. But if I had done like this, next time it'll be faster. And so having that enthusiasm for like next time, I think is really important.
So, Chris, you just described every tradesperson that tackles their first project, and we all go through that. It doesn't matter if
Yeah.
it's a traditional house or a passive house or any kind of house. We all go through those lessons. They're bumps and bruises. That's all they are, right? In construction.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wanted to ask you about which countries are actually doing really well. I know Europe is leading and doing some stuff, but are there specific countries that are actually thriving with this?
Yeah, France is doing amazing things with with bio-based construction. They have lots of really great incentive programs. There's actually as far as straw bale is concerned, there's actually a national certification program in France. Like you literally can go train to be a straw bale installer, plasterer in France, and be certified and licensed. And there are a number earthen-based builders have the same kind of program in France. And then on the other side, builders and developers are kind of rewarded in the French code system for using those materials, and so it kind of like self-reinforces.
What a great
one of the hard
system.
things
Why don't we
here
have
is
that
that
here?
yeah, that's one of the hard things here. It's like, so I'm going to work harder, learn longer to do something that I have to convince people one at a time that they want. Like that's definitely not the pathway to rapid expansion. So so the UK is has some similar programs as that. There's really cool things going on in Germany. So yeah, Europe in general, China too. It can be hard to sort of find out what's going on there, but I'm constantly amazed at how quickly they sort of move and adapt there. They came up with a green building code in I think 2010. But it's the latest version. Like, seems to me like it surpasses everything that we're doing here.
Yeah.
And same, that sort of the innovative materials space, the training. Like, I don't necessarily want that system of government, but one thing it's good at is like make a decision, put the money to it, get it done.
I will agree with you on that. They are very good at that. Very, very good at that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, here it's unfortunate, but the trade associations just put the brakes on so much that it's like, and I think in places where you have governments that don't have to listen to them, or who are, willing to not listen to them, or to like listen to them and talk to them and adapt. But here, I just sort of see home builders associations and stuff, always being the heel draggers. Every time you try to make the code more energy efficient, it's like,
I know
it's going to cost too much. It's going to be too hard. Da, 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 da. And then sure enough, when the code gets updated, everybody figures it out and it was okay. And then the next one comes around, it's like, oh, we can't do that. And we heel drag. And then 5 years later, the code gets improved. It's like, okay, well, we did that. Like, but it just, that seems to be the cycle of like, resist the change as much as possible. And I think, that doesn't help us, move forward in a very good way. I think it's why we're often kind of like the last ones adopting things in this country.
Is it possible, Chris, to kind of create a hybrid where you can use some of the techniques on an existing rental project that you can implement to your clients and go, we get it. The house wasn't built this way to start off with, but this addition's happening. So maybe there's certain things that we can consider when we're doing the addition, or when we're actually renovating, we're doing a full gut on the main floor or something like that. There's certain things that we can do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. All of it. I mean, I think I mentioned the hemp bat insulation earlier on. Like that to me is like that's a great.
I love that.
Yeah, reno material. Things like considering plasters instead of drywall, even just the natural finishes, like just good healthy paints like that. That there's so much just repainting that goes on, and it's the thing that we actually interact with the most health wise, it's like the thing with the most surface area that has the most influence on your space. So just even paying attention to like do everything else conventional and just, you know, use a healthy finish is a great way to go. But yeah, I think lots of times people think about this stuff as like only for new construction, but I think there's a huge opportunity for retrofits. I'll do a sales pitch on earth and floors again. Like it's a great thing to put on over top of a crappy old floor. Like
Yeah.
you don't even have to tear it all up. Put a, you know, 3/4 inch layer of earth and floor over what was there, and it's a beautiful, natural, healthy, affordable. So yeah, I think there's really not very many of these things that we've talked about that wouldn't work in the retrofit scenario. Straw bale might be one of them, just because in bale form, like it doesn't fit nicely into a, you
But
know,
the
a wall
hemp-based
cavity or
spat,
a,
that still is a nice alternative. It actually works really well for that
yep,
application. So I'm totally
yeah.
entertained. Have you heard of anybody like, you know, I don't know about Peterborough, but in Toronto, obviously laneway and auxiliary dwelling units are becoming bigger and bigger. Has
Mm-hmm.
anybody tackled the passive idea of doing a laneway suite that way? Have you heard of anybody doing it?
I've heard of certainly people doing really good versions of that, like on a one-off custom basis.
Okay.
I think it's tricky. Those kind of auxiliary dwellings would work best if they were if the same approach worked in different municipalities. But right now, there's enough differences between how they're regulated that you can't say just like set up a little factory and start making ADUs that you can drop in anybody's backyard,
Yeah.
because in this town it can't be higher than this or that, and it's got to be set back so far, can't be in front of or to the side. You know, like there's so many rules that you end up having to custom make them. But I think if the approach could be more standardized, um, then yeah, like a little unit that just dropped, you know, by crane into somebody's backyard has a lot of potential. And making that in a factory setting allows you to get, you know, the performance, the air tightness, all of that stuff, you know, done really well, because you're doing it in a nice controlled condition. You can blower door test it before it ever leaves, and then it, you know, it's going to arrive and perform right.
Do you? I want to ask you about tech-based. I mean, there's obviously the creature comforts of any home, right? And everybody's always asking for the bells and whistles. Is it a gentle conversation with your clients where they're still interested in having a lot of tech savviness in their house, alongside with the passive side of the house?
I think that really varies kind of person by person.
Okay.
I think I'm probably not the best advocate for that tech, because I'm not very tech savvy myself. I feel like, and I also feel like if you get the basics of the building down right, the need for the tech gets a lot smaller. Like smart
Yes.
thermostats are great when you want to come home and your house is really hot through the day, but you want it to be cool when you walk in at 5:30. If your house is just going to be cool at 5:30 anyway, I don't need that, you know, that thing to, you know, to necessarily do that. But you know, I'll admit that's definitely the gap in my own knowledge and understanding is kind of the more techie side. And I can certainly see when it comes to sort of like load shaving and trying to get peak loads and, you know, shifting time of use for things, all of that kind of stuff is really valuable. I'm just not as up to speed on the ways to do that, what's working, what's not working.
It's another educational series. That's another book that you got to write. It's another. There's a lot more stuff to
I'll let
share.
somebody else write that one.
And I know that on the website you guys do this. I mean, you basically have become a forum where you can get builders and designers and architects and engineers talking with each other and trying to figure out how to build better. That's the whole purpose of it, right?
Yeah, I think, you know, if we can help kind of foster those conversations, that's great. That's something we'd love to do. I think there's lots of other places where that also happens, and just, you know, showing up at those places. I know um, I go down to the NESI conference, the Northeast Sustainable Energy Alliance, I think it is, in Boston every year.
Okay.
What a great community of you know, energy efficiency and sort of healthy home practitioners. Like it's always like a super exciting, 3 days at that conference, because you get all kinds of people specifically from the residential world who are, and from all aspects. Like you've got the designers, you've got the builders, you've got the energy raters, you've got some of the material manufacturers, and just having really good conversations. um, Same kind of thing happens at some of the green building forums and events here too. Boots on the ground is a great example of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Love events like that.
Client wise, there's no kind of stereotypical client here. Like this, there's a cross section of everybody that's interested in this kind of home, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the case, isn't it? You've got younger people
Yeah,
that are buying homes. You got an older people, empty nesters, like whatever. You got all kinds of people that are interested in this.
yeah, and we also, with Endeavor, did a lot of work for, not necessarily with homes, but in for not for profits. So we did a lot of like community type building, museum, a theater, outdoor ed centers, stuff like that too, where those are really interesting because in that case, it's not like a client, it's, a client group. And they often have really well articulated goals and criteria. If you're an outdoor ed center trying to teach kids the best possible ways to be stewards of the environment, it's really easy to get, to talk to them about a building with all the best stuff. So, but yeah, the clients can be really different. I think there tends to be like people who are really concerned about health, like their own health. Either they have sort of environmental sensitivities now, or are very concerned about that, and the real sort of like energy efficiency kind of nerds. Like I want the most efficient home. Those two, we always try to talk to them about these other aspects, but those are always two sort of like strong motivating factors that we see in clients. It's I really care about energy efficiency, and or I really care about the health side.
I think the health side is critical these days. I think people quickly realize after the funny last few years that we had how their homes weren't working properly, and how their
Mm-hmm.
homes could have been much better.
Yeah,
And so little things that you can't be done, which is
yeah,
great. But it's always an uphill battle when I see certain products jump on that net zero marketing angle that I don't appreciate, which I get it, I understand that, but it's I guess just being in the industry, you get a little savvy to it, and you're like, that's actually not a really good product, and this should be a better product, and I just want to see more of
yeah.
those better products on the market, option wise.
Yeah, it's that sort of like single focus. It's like if you put the blinders on and it's like, okay,
It's a
energy
beautiful
efficiency is
product.
all I care about, then there are some things that like fit that box. But if it's like I care about that and maybe some other things, like it's like, oh, okay, some of those things don't have characteristics that are also positive in all of these other ways. And I think that's just a human thing, right? We're very good at like getting single focused,
Yeah.
and it's always harder to step back and go, make the picture bigger. But I think that's in the building world, that's really important to do. Like what are you missing if you've got your nose dialed so tightly into,
I
say,
know.
an
I
energy
know.
efficiency world, or the health world, or any one factor. You can miss a lot if you put too much focus on that one area.
It's interesting you bringing that up, Chris, because that's like I would say that's probably the first lesson that Greg and Shervin taught me from Boots on the Ground was about being the system, understanding the whole system, and being a
Mm-hmm.
part of the collective. And I think every passive person or any building consultant person that I've had on the show, they have that same mindset. It's not just a focus on a single element. It's the actual entire structure, the build, and what it's contributing, and what one product starts and where the next product ends, and things like that. So it's like you
Mm-hmm.
have to understand everything, which is
Yeah,
really, it just becomes more like you, to your point earlier about more education. We have to do more homework. We have to do more research. We have to understand this. And most people, for the most part, don't want to do that. They really don't want to
mm-hmm.
do that. They're just, give me the key. I want to walk in. But,
Yeah,
you probably want a house that you really want to walk in, and then,
yeah.
live there for a while.
Yeah, I think another part of it is just the partnerships. Like we've been able to make really efficient homes with really innovative mechanical systems. I'm not a mechanical systems designer. I don't want to go take that training. I'm not doing that training. But what I want to do is find the people I can collaborate with who are, and like they get my goals, I get their goals. They don't have to know everything about what I do, and I don't have to know everything about what they do. But we can bring those two things together and go, yeah, how do we turn my stuff and your stuff into a system that works? And I don't want to know the finer points of that ERV and how it's balanced, but but I want to know that you know that, and that you're going to do a good job, and that you understand some other parts of the construction, and then we can put those pieces together.
Do you get clients that have a conversation with you about EMF? Do they ever get
Yep.
into? Okay, so is that growing? Is that a growing segment of the market, or are they?
I feel like and I don't want to dismiss it this way, but I feel like it sort of had its sort of like fad moment where people were really concerned about it. We
Okay,
talked to a lot of people about it, and less so now. And not that I think it's gone away or is any less real, but I think it it definitely had a moment of like media attention and stuff that made people really think about it. I in some ways the world has kind of gone in a way where there was a time not that long ago, the buildings we were doing, including this house, we made sure that every room had a like a hardwired internet connection, because if you're concerned about being surrounded by Wi-Fi all the time, let's build a house where you don't need it.
yeah.
Now, none of my devices will work with a hard connection, and so it's like, what am I going to do for EMFs and Wi-Fi? It's like if I want a computer that's but have the Wi-Fi, we can do things like put it on a timer so it turns off at night. But that that window on being able to sort of protect yourself from it but still have access, it has kind
Yeah.
of closed.
And that's that
Uh,
balancing act, right? Where you start talking about trying to be conscious and trying to be health, and then having the tech savviness, like having that tech connection in your
yeah,
home as well too. So it's a shame. And then the unfortunate thing is the moment that you step out of your house, then you're just bombarded with a sea of EMF, right? Because we watch this, we see all the cell towers that are being parked in so many neighborhoods, so close to homes and so close to
yeah,
places. So it's just like, I know that more and more clients are having these conversations, but there is
mm,
a balancing act now because of these companies that are building these products that you're being forced to Wi-Fi. You have to go
mm-hmm.
that route. So, and even all my projects, I've always hardwired everything. I've always made the suggestion, everything's exposed. Let's just run it. And the
Yeah,
term future proofing comes up a lot. Let's just run it. We'll just have it. It's there.
yeah,
But now you got devices that don't work with that. So it's an interesting. I want to, before we get close to the 12 questions of construction, I know that you want to talk a little bit about Embark report and the NRC study and Nelson, all the other stuff that you guys are offering as well too.
sure, yeah. I think just a month ago I put out a report with RMI that kind of took all of the embodied carbon work that we've done at Builders for Climate Action and kind of summarized it. But um, yeah, in all of those studies, we kind of took as built drawings from homes that had been recently built in those different areas. So we did Vancouver and Toronto and Nelson, BC, and then also for a developer working in the Florida and the South Carolina, like the southeast of the U.S. And kind of ran them through Beam and got a sense. I think in total we've done over 800 houses now,
Oh,
so we're
wow.
starting to get a really good sense of what is the carbon footprint of like a normal house, or a house at the high end of that spectrum or the low end of that. And so I think what's really stood out so far is that the average results from all of those studies fall within a really narrow band. So like there really is kind of like a normal or a typical carbon footprint. It sits like around 180 to 200 kilograms of emissions per square meter.
Okay.
Um, we've seen results higher than 500. We've seen results as low as 70, but that band kind of captures most of what's being built. But in all of those studies, the homes from the lower carbon footprint side of the study were significantly better than the average, but they were also just like homes that a builder was building. Like
Yeah.
they were not setting out to build a low embodied carbon home. It's just kind of the happy accident of the kind of suite of materials they happen to be choosing were all from the lower end of the spectrum versus, the high results. Nobody was setting out to build a house with a really high, carbon footprint. These are the materials they happen to choose, and they happen to be from that end of the spectrum. But at the low end, these buildings were sort of like 30, 40, 50% lower than average. And so what that says to me is if a bunch of conventional builders are building at 40% less than average, everybody can get there fairly easily.
Yep.
Like it's not,
Yep.
they didn't need new products. They didn't need innovative products. There was no more cost. Like these are just people building homes. Most of them sort of like, tract homes and sort of developer built homes. So if somebody's 40% less than average, there's that much low hanging fruit out there for everybody.
Yeah.
And then, the studies also show like if you do more, you could get even better. But that was what really stood out for me, was just this sort of like fact that there is all this low hanging fruit out there, and that it's not more expensive. It's not harder to do. You could do it with code compliant stuff. You can do it with stuff you can get at your local, building supply yard. And 40% is where the Canadian government wants us to be by 2030. So there's a bunch of builders out there who are already 40% less than average. So, that's not a hard goal for this whole industry to think about being able to hit.
I love it. It's amazing, Chris. Thank you so much. Just before we get into the 12 questions there, Chris Magwood here, Builders for Climate Action, www.buildersforclimateaction.org. And you can reach him at chris@buildersforclimateaction.org, and also the Rocky Mountain Institute, rmi.org, and all over social media. You ready for the 12 questions?
Sure.
There's no right or wrong, and there's definitely no cash prizes. What's your favorite construction word?
I like plum. I gotta say, there's something. It's satisfying when something is plum, but those words with the silent B's are always.
It's nice. It's actually a very nice word. What is your least favorite construction word?
Lintel.
What turns you on in construction?
Beautiful plaster work.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to go to Europe to see it.
Yeah.
What turns you off in construction?
Things that are made to look like something, but they aren't that thing. Whether it's, vinyl that looks like fake wood, or, this that looks like fake stone.
Does it bother you too? Because I just thought I was the only one. It just bothers me that, like people tell you, look, it looks just like the real thing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
What's your favorite curse word? You don't have to give it up. We haven't been cursing up a Powell here on this show, but if you've got a favorite curse word.
I don't actually. I can't think of one.
If you don't worry. That's a past question. You don't have to answer it. What's your favorite vehicle in the entire world?
I love my Nissan Leaf.
Yeah,
gotta say, we bought it in 2018, and I just never failed to be impressed that like this is an electric car, but that notion didn't even exist 10 years ago. And it does everything that any car I've ever had does, and most of it better. And so it blows me away.
What's your least favorite vehicle?
Well, this is not gonna resonate with everybody who's into construction, but like the massive diesel pickup truck.
Don't worry about it. Lots of guys who drive those trucks have said this, so don't worry about that. What construction sound or noise do you love?
We had a really old school plaster sprayer when we were doing a lot of straw bale work, and it sounded like a bunch of school children kind of making fart noises over and over and over. So it was hard to beat that for a construction sound.
Did you record it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I would love to hear. I have an idea what it sounds like, but I would love to hear it. What construction sound or noise do you hate?
The constant beeping of a laser level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just find it. Just
Yeah.
find it. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt one day, Chris?
Hmm. I kind of have an interest in being a plumber, so I would attempt that.
Really? Huh?
Yeah.
Why
I've
not?
always enjoyed the plumbing parts of buildings that I've done, but it strikes me as very satisfying. Containing water, like when you do something and the water doesn't spray out, you've done a good job.
Yeah.
So yeah,
What profession would you not like to do?
I would not like to be a building inspector.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it is really tough. Even the times I've had hassles, it's like you got to give it to the people doing that work. Like it's tough and thankless, and but absolutely necessary.
Yeah, it is. Last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at those pearly gates?
Uh, Welcome, step into my beautiful straw bale home.
Of course, it's up there. Totally up there. Chris, absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that we connected, and sorry about last time the misunderstanding, but I'm so glad that we had you, and you've educated the listeners quite a bit, and I hope more and more tradespeople get into this industry, and at least educate themselves and understand this industry, and understand the possibilities that are behind this, and that the market is, they're asking for this. They're totally asking for this.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's
Well,
cool.
thanks so much.
Everybody check them out. It's Builders for Climate Action. Website again is www.buildersforclimateaction.org, and his email is chris@buildersforclimateaction.org, and it's also Rocky Mountain Institute at rmi.org. Thank you very much, Chris.
Yep. Thanks.
We're
Bye.
out of here, Angelina.